As Predecessor continues to grow and develop as a game, and as we mature as a player base, one of the core, central mechanics of the game that is getting a lot of heat and discussion stirred up recently is Fangtooth. Epic Games was constantly reiterating the idea of the Raptor and the Fangtooth in original Paragon, and it'll be interesting to see if Omega can come up with a more permanent solution or if Predecessor's in for a similar path. Is Fangtooth a healthy mechanic for the game? Let's talk about it! Hey there, internet strangers, Truth in here. Let's dive right into this with some pros. Some things that I like about Fangtooth. Number one, it makes the jungle a winnable lane, so to speak. There's an argument to be made that the jungle role is a little bit too important in Predecessor compared to some of the other lanes, but as a jungle main, I dig this. I enjoy the fact that the jungler that times their ganks around the spawning of Fangtooth and rotations to it is going to have an advantage over the jungler that times their gank attempts more randomly or prioritizing the red buff or the blue buff. This means that the jungle role isn't quite as feast or famine as it is in other MOBAs. You don't just live and die off the success of your first 3 gank attempts. But the Fangtooth is a lot more than just a jungle objective, which leads me to point number 2 that I think is really healthy for the game, and that is that it promotes fights around objectives rather than just random brawling. Fangtooth as a concept focuses the gameplay of Predecessor, and it does a great job of preventing 2 extremes that I think are really unhealthy gameplay loops. One being the 20-minute laning phase where nobody groups until after Orb Prime spawns or after the first tier 2 goes down, and the other being just random brawling on whoever gets caught out on a rotation. I think that it's a good thing that there's a consequence at minute 6 if you are rotating on the river, get caught out, and get killed. Your team is then put at a disadvantage at an opportunity to fight for a objective rather than just everybody resetting and going on with the game. Now, I did want to cut in just for a second and say that I know that these are very opinion-based, and admit that I'm not the biggest expert. I don't have the prerequisite 10,000 hours in League and Dota that many of the people in the community do have. What I am saying is that I do think it's healthy for the game for there to be objectives that matter and that people can group for, that are neutral, especially a neutral jungle objective that is worth grouping for before 11 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes. I know that there's more conversation, more healthy conversation to be had about whether it's too early at 5 minutes or whether the Fangtooth is too soloable, especially by certain characters early, but I think it's a healthy start. There's some interesting pros, obviously, but it's time to move on to cons. And realistically, there's one overarching one that is going to cause some of the other issues that we'll discuss as we go. And this that Fangtooth currently is just way overtuned. Fangtooth 3 and on giving permanent stacking stat power, that's a mouthful, basically makes it where taking Fangtooth is always the right answer. I should, bring minions or be helpful in some way, but I'm probably just going to get another Fangtooth so that we can see how much damage an ult can hit for on Kalari. Use your imagination with me for a second if you would. Let's say it's 20 minutes into the game and your team just got a 3-for-1. Normally you'd have some options. You can keep the pressure on in mid lane and see if you can get some more picks, extend death timers, and have the other team on a stagger. You could rotate to your right lane that you had minions set for earlier and you can go push down a tier 2. Or you can fall back and go take Fangtooth. Right now, if you do anything other than falling back and taking that Fangtooth, especially if it's your 3rd or your 4th Fangtooth, you're kind of just playing wrong. And that's not how a MOBA should be. It should be about player choice. The stat buffs make it where it discourages players from pushing their current earned advantages that are a risk in preference of just a delayed advantage that will inherently be safer thanks to the stats. You want to fight, your duo queue asks, hey, should we go push down that tier 2 tower? It might be close. No, obviously not. We should just go grab another Fangtooth, especially if it's our 3rd or 4th, so that we can just fart on the tower later and it will go down on our way to rolling through this team even harder. I've also, more rarely granted, seen the inverse to be true as well, where the Fangtooth isn't just a win more mechanic. I have a game personally where we were down 47-17 in kills. I think it ended like 51-28. We got a few more, where we stacked a 4th Fangtooth. We somehow got Fangtooths 4-2, and we were able to pull out that game even though we should have been rolled. So to kind of sum up that point, there should never just be one right answer, and currently in Predecessor it feels like there's one correct answer, and it's to kill Fangtooth at every single opportunity. This leads to 2 other noticeable kind of sub-points that I want to talk about. One, due to the strength of the 3rd and 4th on Fangtooth, It makes the cool and relatively impactful buffs from the first and second Fangtooth feel kind of meh. Like, we should not be sleeping on increased buff duration and out of combat move speed. Those are a huge deal, especially if you're a jungle rolling in with a double duration red buff with more movement speed on a rotation. That's huge. But due to the overwhelming strength of the third Fangtooth on, they now just feel like a prerequisite rather than a reward in their own right. The other situation that this can create, and I could see the argument where this would be a matchmaking issue or whatever category you want to put it into, is that if you're playing with a team that is uncoordinated, or if the jungler doesn't recognize the value of a Fangtooth and the other team is just constantly getting them and your team is not bothering to contest, it can become a really frustrating experience. I've been on both sides of this, but I'll describe it this way. Imagine you're in a game, it's 12 to 15. The towers are even, the margin is really close, but the other team has 3 Fangtooths. You know that you've lost, even though no one on your team has done anything super inherently wrong to that point in the game. They just didn't focus one of the many objectives to the same level that the enemy team did. That leads me to what I really wanted to get into with this video. What can be done about it? Can Fangtooth be saved? To keep this conversation focused, because my initial draft of this had way too much, I'm just going to ask 3 questions. If you have answers to any of these questions or anything else that you just think of that could be a solution, I would also love to hear about those in the comment sections. But let's start with question number 1. Are permanent stacking stat buffs just bad for the game? Are they an unhealthy mechanic? Of course, there are simple ways to measure this. Let's say that a meta just cuts the power in half that you gain from third Fangtooth on for each Fangtooth kill. Would Fangtooth still be too strong just because permanent stat bonuses are so good? Or would we see the Fangtooth become a non-objective and lose a lot of the properties of those pros that I was describing earlier? If the bonuses are too low, would teams still be willing to fight for them? Would the risk match the reward? The ultimate question here is there a magic number? Is there a magic point of balance that could be reached where the Fangtooth is still impactful without being overpowering and always being the right answer, existing as it does, where you get stacking permanent bonuses as you kill more of them? The answer to this question may be yes, for all we know. I sort of doubt it, especially if the Fangtooth remains in a state where you just get every stat, both physical and magical power and physical and magical armor. But I've been wrong before, a trend that I'm sure will continue well into my future. But that leads me to question number 2. Even if a perfect numbers-based balance can be reached, is that the most interesting solution? What could be used as a replacement instead? We already have, as mentioned earlier, some really cool effects for the first 2 Fangtooths that are not strictly stat-based. Could there be more solutions in that vein? Could a tiny amount of spell burn be added to spells after killing a certain number of Fangtooth? Could a Fangtooth be introduced that somehow interacts with Predecessor's vertical mobility? Maybe a Fangtooth kill, maybe an early one too, could proc a small burst of healing upon every 5th last hit of a minion or something like that. Maybe there are solutions that are stat-based, but they aren't just pure damage or survivability. Maybe one that gives you tenacity, maybe one that gives you slightly lowered ultimate cooldowns. At this point, I'm obviously just spitballing, but my question remains the same. Is there a viable replacement out there than just giving pure damage and damage reduction stats? The third and final question/solution that I want to look at is what I'm going to call calculated randomness. Could calculated randomness be introduced and that be helpful in solving the Fangtooth problem? I try to avoid unnecessary comparisons here, but I think a fair one would be to the Dragon system in League, where each one provides a different lasting effect. Obviously, in the hypothetical universe where we just copy and paste the Drake system into Predecessor, added damage could obviously be part of that solution. The Infernal Drake is a thing in League. But there are now, as of the 2023 preseason, 4 other options that provide other meaningful effects, and they're randomized. Let's say that there was a Cloud Dragon type effect on a Fangtooth in Predecessor, and you know that that one's coming, and you know that your team has long cooldown, high-powered ultimates. That might be more valuable to you than one that just adds a little bit of attack damage. I do want to clarify, I'm not saying that we should just copy and paste that system into Predecessor. I think it would feel woefully out of place, and it would be as much or more of a challenge to balance as time goes on. But I'm wondering if the solution could be in that vein of adding that calculated randomness. Could changing the order that rewards are granted and the types of rewards that are granted across different matches be a part of the solution to the Fangtooth always being the right answer problem? But that's it. That's all I've got. I know that we presented more questions there at the end than solutions, and that was kind of the purpose of this video. I just wanted to get some conversation started, especially knowing that Ometa is the type of studio that takes our engagement and takes our ideas into consideration, and maybe this conversation can lead to some cool solutions. So feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section. Tell me what I got right, what I got wrong. Feel free to drop a follow, and I will catch you, Internet Strangers, in the next one.